right, so back at it after a couple month delay. Had some delays with holidays, some parts that gave me some issues, and then my family also had COVID too. So a little bit of a delay, like I said, but back at it. And what I wanted to cover in this video is to go over the front suspension components we looked at in my last video, and also talk about, like I said, some hangups I had, most notably with that particular anti-sway bar, which I'll get into in a few moments. And then I wanted to talk about the next phase that I'm going to be doing on the build before I tackle the rear of the car suspension wise, and that's going to be a brake upgrade. Now, I wasn't going to address the brakes on the car this early in the build because I was still doing some research and such, but some Black Friday deals came up and I couldn't pass on some components, one of which you're looking at right now, which is some very nice two-piece rotors by ECS Tuning. So I'll get into that and some of the other modifications that I'm going to put on the car brake-wise in order to try to squeeze the most I can out of the stock brake system before I decide to spend $5,000 to $7,000 or more on a big brake kit. So I want to try to see what I can get out of the factory brake setup, so I'll get into that as well. So we'll start at the top of the car, just a quick shot of the Vorslag camber plates. Now, if you recall, my camber plates were pre-installed on the 3DM kit that I bought, but if you are buying the camber plates separate yourself and adding them to coilover kit you already have or you purchase, the instructions online, I did a quick Google search and it looks pretty straightforward. So, but anyway, there's a shot of them up top. Now we'll move down to the bottom of the car and you'll see the Öhlins, the Swift springs, and then the camber plates from the top. So right, so underneath the car now, you can see both the new tension strut and M3 lower control arm. And if we look over here, you can see that nice, sexy Turner monoball. So all this stuff went in pretty straightforward. I did have to clean up these openings here to get the new control arms to slide in, but nothing a Dremel couldn't tackle. But other than that, pretty straightforward as far as the install. Now, if you'll notice, I have a new sway bar and it's blue. This is an H&R sway bar. It is different than the red Eibach bar that I looked at in my last video. So in a few moments, I'll go into why this bar is on the car and not the other one. But as far as the bottom of the car, pretty straightforward, like I said. The only thing I would add is you got to remember this M3 bar is slightly longer than the stock 335i bar, which is what gives it that additional negative camber. You have to accommodate for that on your tie rod end. When I took it down the street for a quick shakedown, I had the wheel kind of getting tugged out of my hand. And the reason is because the suspension geometry is off, because I did not do that, but I'm going to go back in and do it before I drive it to the shop when I go to get my alignment. All right, so let's talk about this sway bar fiasco that happened here. So you can see the Eibach bar next to the stock bar. And right off the bat, if you're paying attention, you notice the little hitch here and here on the Eibach bar that is not present on the stock bar. That hitch is also not present on the H&R bar that I ended up installing. So check the part numbers, make sure I got the right part. And as far as Eibach is concerned, this bar right here will hook up. But where I had issues is as I got the bar hooked up to the subframe and then subsequently tried to hook it up to the end link, there was barely any. In fact, on one side, it was touching the tie rod end. And no matter how I played with it, I could not get it to sit with enough clearance. So, trying to be cheap and buying a $179 bar versus this $300+ bar that came highly recommended, I'll eat it. So that's, experience for me. But when I bought the H&R bar, which took a week or so to get, mounted it up, and boom, it's perfect. It fits perfect, just like the stock bar, only this one is solid 27 millimeter and looks a lot better. So looking forward to seeing how it helps the car handle. Okay, so moving on to the brakes. In front of me here is one of the ECS Tuning two-piece rotors. So it has the aluminum hat mated to a drilled in slotted rotor. Like I said, great Black Friday deal from ECS on this, so I couldn't pass it up. So what I found myself doing is just putting together a part list to, like I said, max out the stock brake system and upgrade it as much as I can before committing so much money to a big brake kit. So what I want to do right now is I'm gonna put both this and a stock rotor on a scale to show you the weight savings. So let's get into that right now. All right, so a little makeshift scale here. So this is a stock rotor, and you'll notice it weighs 24 pounds even. Now I'll grab the ECS rotor. We'll reset this thing. And we got 19.6. So about 4.4 pounds per wheel in reduced unsprung weight from the aluminum hat. So, you know, if you're doing math, that's about 17.6 pounds. We'll call it 17.5 pounds of reduced unsprung weight. I'd say that's going to be noticeable. All right, so here's one of the front calipers off the car and cleaned up in preparation for some paint I'm gonna do. But what I wanna go over right now is talk about an upgrade I'm gonna do to try to, like I mentioned, get the most out of the stock brake system. So this is obviously a single piston caliper. And one of the reasons why a single piston caliper isn't as favorable as, let's say, a 4 or 6 piston caliper is due to the tendency to have uneven pad wear. So you have a single pressure point. Under hard braking and other certain scenarios, you can have a scenario where the caliper moves around and thus the pads wear unevenly. Obviously, that's not favorable. So one of the things I'm going to do is eliminate the main culprit for that phenomena. And what I've done here is I've taken out the old guide pin bushings that go here and here. And as you can see, like anything else, they're very pliable and they allow the guide pin that sits in there to rock around. And that creates that phenomenon where you have the uneven wear. So a solution for that is a kit from ECS Tuning. These are bronze guide pin bushings, which obviously are much harder, new pins, and some hardware. So what this does is rather than it sitting in the rubber bushing, it sits in this bronze one. As you can see, there's no play at all. So it doesn't allow that unevenness to happen, or it greatly reduces it, one of the two. If this particular scenario, along with some of the other upgrades I'm gonna do, don't work down the road, then maybe it will be time to go to a big brake kit. But as I mentioned, with how expensive they are and all the other modifications I plan to do to this car, I figured I'd try to spend a little bit of money, get the most out of the stock kit, and see what happens. Okay, so I just got done pressing in the new bushings. Pretty straightforward process. I mean, obviously with anything like this, you don't want it to bind up. So when you initially set these in, you want to make sure they're going in straight. And ECS sells a tool made for this. And all it is just, you know, a basic rudimentary nut and bolt with a spacer on there. You know, you put it in there, you tighten it very slowly, and it presses it right into place. So that's this particular upgrade finished, and now we're gonna move on to painting these things. All right, so a couple days passed. So here's one of the front calipers, freshly painted. So I wanted to quickly go over the product that I use. I should have done a video on it, but it is a pretty straightforward way to do your brakes. So this is a company called G2. I found it on Amazon. I did some research on it, and it looked like a pretty legit product with really good ratings. You can see it comes in a variety of different colors. So it's a brushed on paint that's comes with a paint and then like a hardener. And apparently it's supposed to be very heat resistant and very strong. So we're gonna put it through its paces. Red's gonna be the accent color on my car. But here is the finished product, and you can tell, I know the lighting's not very good, but trust me, in person, it looks like a rotor painted from the factory, or powder coated from the factory. And also too, here's a good shot of the guide pin bushings on there as well. What I'm also going to do, you know, I have a set of stainless steel brake lines that I'm going to add to the car. This is a stock rubber line off the front. I've already put one of the front lines on, but the obvious reason why you go to stainless steel is because these rubber lines, especially over time, start to get weak and they expand a little bit more than you want them to. The stainless steel braided lines do not do that. So it gives you a lot more pedal feel and brake pressure sustained over time. Rounding out modifications to the brakes is going to be a set of Hawk Performance Street 5.0 pads. Anyone who's done any research on upgraded brake pads for the E90X chassis and other high performance cars knows that Hawk Performance has very good brake pads. These pads come highly recommended from many sources and people that I've reached out to. So I decided to go with these. My car is probably going to live predominantly on the street. I may track it here and there. So I wanted to have a pad that was more street friendly, which typically translates into less noise, less dust, and a lot easier on the rotors. So these are ultimately the pads that I went with. What's nice is they come with brand new wear pad sensors. I know some brakes, when you buy them, don't come with that and you got to buy them separately. So I thought that was a nice add. And then the last thing I'll say is I'm going to be replacing the stock .4 brake fluid in my car. I'm going to do a complete system flush. With it being torn apart right now, it's kind of already flushed out, but we'll do a complete system flush, and we're going to be using the Motul RBF 660, which has a much higher boiling point than your typical .4 brake fluid and is much more suited for high performance braking applications. All right, so that's the caliper on, all loaded up with pads and the anti-rattle clip in, which I also painted. And as you can see with the rotor, the line, the coilover, looks race car. So you can see the lighting isn't perfect, but you can just see how good that paint came out on the rotor. I'll go ahead and do it with the wheel on now. And that's with the wheel on. Looks really good, except for the wheels, very dirty. The whole car is covered in a layer of dust. Thing's been sitting here for months. Really can't wait to get it on the ground, get an alignment done, shake it down. On the next video, which is coming up, I've been hot and heavy on the car, so I'm gonna have another video coming out, and it's gonna cover the rear suspension components. So right now, actually I have the exhaust out, as you can see, and I'm removing the rear diff carrier, and I'm going to be installing a new diff carrier that has a wave track limited slip differential. And I'm gonna go over some of the delays I experienced. I was gonna use one company, now I'm going with a different company. And nothing against company A, it's just that they have such a backlog. I didn't wanna wait, so I'm using another very reputable company. But in the next video, I'm gonna go over the rear suspension parts and go over the limited slip differential. Stay tuned.